Let's say you've got it good. You're liking your life right now. Do you need to learn the art of letting go of good to get to great? Though it might sound too much like a Jim Collins book title, it's literally what today's guest has done, and more than once in her life. And she's done it in midlife. So if you want to reach a new level of influence, power, or success, that you might define as, who knows, revenue or freedom of time, you might have to stop doing something you're doing now pretty well. Either stop it completely or delegate it to somebody else. Listen closely to this episode where one successful book may or may not lead to another. One successful podcast may have to go away to birth a better one. For you, I wish whatever you're dreaming about or better. And I hope you get used to that statement. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to She Means Fitness Business, a division of my business, Voice for Fitness. And at Voice for Fitness, all of us on the team believe that you want to be an inspirational example to other midlife women. In order to do that, you and I both need a profitable health and fitness coaching business. And the problem usually is, number one or two, a lack of clients or a lack of revenue coming from those clients. You, my friend, are likely undercharging. And that'll make anybody feel uncertain about whether you can succeed, whether it's sustainable. And I believe you deserve consistent, dependable revenue from clients you love. I mean, we understand how this feels. I personally have been there at 49, gutting my life, literally, and my business. I started over at zero and said I want to have a bigger reach. But when you do that, do you know when you say goodbye to the paycheck the next day, you're making nothing. You're making zero. Now, there may be a little something in the bank, but trust me, after the first 11 months of my own business back in 2013, I was panicking and realized how quickly someone could become homeless. I saw it for the first time in my life. I thought, oh my gosh, wow, they're people just like us. But here's the deal. This is exactly why I train fitness pros internationally, and I coach them on business and sales for 25 years. I do it in 3 steps. Number 1, get you more clients right away. Number 2, make sure you're profiting from those clients. But number 3, we guard your time. We don't need you to be working coast to coast. We don't need your kids to say you work all the time. I've been there when an 8-year-old told me just that. So I'd love for you to book a call, see if we're a good fit so we can accelerate your success. But for now, I want you to get the Health and Fitness Professionals Scorecard so you can look at where in your business you have gaps. This is a list of all the things in different categories that you need to have in a row. You probably have some, but I'm guessing that there are some that you don't if you still want to generate more revenue than you have right now. So we'll put that in the show notes. You can go and get it. It'll be Fitness Marketing Mastery /scorecard if you want to grab that, but stay with me because my guest is a don't miss. We're not talking about the topic of her expertise here, where she's established herself. We're talking about how she got there. This is a very specific behind the scenes in the green room with our guest, talking about her business. Jen Stevens. She's the author of the New York Times and USA Today bestseller, Fast, Feast, Repeat, and Delay, Don't Deny, Living an Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle, an Amazon #1 bestseller in the weight loss category, as well as Cleanish, Eat Mostly Clean, Live Mainly Clean, and Unlock Your Body's Natural Ability to Self-Clean, another Amazon #1 bestseller in several categories. Jen has lived the intermittent fasting lifestyle since 2014, losing over 80 pounds. She is the host of 2 top-ranked podcasts, but you're going to want to listen to this and possibly to yesterday's Flipping 50 podcast with Jen. That's a out public, front of public podcast. You get the green, juicy stuff. You're going to want to hear the stories about her podcast, and throwing the baby out with the bathwater may be a part of that. You're going to want to hear about her Intermittent Fasting Stories podcast and the Fast, Feast, Repeat Intermittent Fasting Life podcast she hosts with Sherry Bullock. And you actually can join her private community by going to jenstevens.com/community. You're going to love this podcast, but I want you to pay special attention to your mindset going into it. We're talking about the how she built it, not the what she built, not the acclaim or how she wrote the book necessarily, but how she birthed the ideas for books, how she might have had to kick one podcast to the curb to birth and make room for another podcast that did it better. But also, I want you to listen between the words she says and how she does it. What's her frame of mind about putting something new out into the universe? And how does that compare with your own? Let's dive in. Jen Stevens, thanks again for coming over and double dipping on this.
Oh, happy to do it.
All right. You mentioned starting a new podcast and how it's already outperformed your first. And you made the comment about having to let go of things. You know, the universe is speaking to me personally, apparently, because I've just read the book 10X is Easier Than 2X. And it really falls into alignment with that philosophy a little bit. And I'm wondering, you know, in order to grow really big and explode, maybe you have to let some things go that are doing pretty well.
Yeah.
What was your reason for starting this new adventure? And did you have to let go of something in order to do it?
That's a great question. So I've been podcasting since 2017, and I started off with a podcast. It was called the Intermittent Fasting Podcast. I was a co-host on that one. I did that one for about 5 years, and I let that one go because it wasn't serving me anymore. But in the meantime, in 2018, I started a podcast just with me and guests. It was Intermittent Fasting Stories, and I really loved doing that one. And that one still continues to this day. Then in around 2020, fall of 2020, a friend of mine said, you know, I've been watching you podcast. I would like to do it too. Can you help me get started? And she was talking to me about her dream of being a podcaster. And she's like, I don't really know if I'm going to have a co-host. I'm not really sure. And then I was like, wait a minute. Do you want me to co-host with you? And she thought about it for a little while and she's like, absolutely. And that's where the Life Lessons podcast was born, right there in the fall of 2020. And, you know, I had been doing 2 intermittent fasting podcasts for a few years now at that point. And it was really nice to talk about something that was not intermittent fasting. And we did that podcast and people were really excited about it. They loved it. We had a good listenership. But as time went on, I realized it wasn't growing. You know, an episode would come out, X number of thousands of people would listen to it, but our downloads were not going up. They were not increasing. And basically, you know, we were able to pay for the podcast itself, but it was not making any money at all. So it was a hobby. And look, I love podcasting, but you know, I have a lot that I'm working on. And so did I need an extra podcast that was a hobby? Really not. But I didn't want to let my friend down. We've been doing this for a long time. So in the meantime, I left the other one. For a while, I was doing 3 different podcasts.
Oh my gosh.
Right. But I left the first one.
Was there ever a risk where I do this at the end where I say, you'll find the show notes and I have to stop and think, wait, which podcast am I doing right now?
Well, they felt so different to do because the one I had with the co-host that I did from the beginning that I did for 5 years, we had assistants that did all that.
Okay.
And so I just would, you know, I'd walk on literally, you know, and I'd walk into my studio, do the podcast, walk away. That all got handled. So that was no problem. And she did the intro and the outro kind of stuff. But with my own podcast, I always knew that was easy because it was just me and a guest every time. And with Life Lessons, Sherry and I, my co-host, we kind of divvied up the responsibility. So that was okay as well. And I loved doing it. We had amazing guests on that podcast. And our audience really liked it. But as I said, it wasn't growing. And so we gave ourselves 6 months from, you know, starting in, I guess, near the end of 2022. And we were like, you know, it's time for us to see if we can sell some advertising. And we signed with an agency and they sold 0 ads. for our show, which was really hard because, here I am with intermittent fasting stories and, I'm sponsored by Wonderful Pistachios and Green Chef and all these great companies. And here I am, this other one, we were having 41,000 downloads a month, which sounds like a lot, but it was 2.5 years of back content. That's really not enough to attract, advertisers. So right around that same time, someone came into our community and said, Jen and Sherry, I love the Life Lessons podcast. Have y'all thought about doing a fasting podcast where you answer questions? Because the one that I left after being on for 5 years, we answered listener questions and people had missed that format with me. And so we were coming up to the end of our 6 months of not successfully monetizing Life Lessons. And I said, Sherry, did you see that post? She's like, yeah. And so we just made a decision that we were going to pivot. And it was harder for Sherry because she it was her dream. The Life Lessons podcast was her dream, and she liked talking about all the different topics, as did I. But as soon as the new Fast Feast Repeat podcast came out, it was surpassing Life Lessons from week one and with the number of downloads. And, 2.5 years in, we were, like I said, 40 something downloads a month with all the back catalog. We're already at 130,000 downloads in the past 30 days, just with 11 episodes. So
wow,
my audience spoke.
Wow.
A few people would hear me talk about anything, but people really, my niche is intermittent fasting, and that's what people want to hear me talk about. So it taught me a really important lesson that, people will want to hear what you have to say, but they may not want to hear everything you have to say. They want to hear you talk about what you're known for.
Sounds like marriage, actually.
Well, a little bit, yeah.
Very cool. Okay. Have you done something like that before in life and business where here's where I am and this, is okay, but I think I can let go of this good to go to something greater?
Well, are you talking about my teaching career, maybe, perhaps?
I'm talking about, I would definitely think that that's there, but
Yes.
is there anything else? Like in writing books, I mean, you probably have an archive library of a lot of ideas for books too.
I do. Well, similar exact situation with that. My first book was self-published, Delay, Don't Deny, Living an Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle. And that book continues to sell well to this day. And, I wrote that one in 2016. And it's a good little book. And it gets people started with intermittent fasting. And then when I finally had a publisher book deal for Fast Feast Repeat, it was a New York Times bestseller. I was so excited. Because, you have this idea of what it means to be a New York Times bestseller. You're like, oh, I'm a New York Times bestseller. I can write anything I want now. No. Lies. I had some ideas and I was proposing them to my editor and my literary agent. They're like, no, you can't switch your genre. And I'm like, but I want to. I have all these ideas. They're like, no. So they let me write a book called Cleanish. Eat mostly clean, live mainly clean, and unlock your body's natural ability to self-clean. I was really passionate about that idea. And, obviously intermittent fasting is one of your body's self-cleaning tools. And so I'm like, well, see, this is related. This is what I'm doing. And it's the journey a lot of us take with intermittent fasting. You start off, you're doing the intermittent fasting, you start feeling better. And then without even meaning to, you change what you're eating. You feel, the better you feel, the better you want to feel. And so suddenly here we are eating organic foods and cooking at home and before we were driving through. And so it's a very natural progression. So I wrote the book Cleanish and I was like, my people, they will buy it. Well, some people bought it, but not as many as bought my fasting books. And like one of the reviews was like, this book did not teach me about intermittent. I'm like, well, it's not an intermittent fasting book. They were mad that it wasn't an intermittent fasting book. So, all right, mea culpa, I got it. I understand. People really wanted me to write books about intermittent fasting. And I even told my editor, I'm like, I'm never writing another intermittent fasting book again. I don't need to. Fast Feast Repeat was everything that I wanted to say. And then I finally got another idea of one that I was like, oh, I know what we need now. So I have one coming out that's coming out end of December of this year, December 26th. It's available for pre-order. It's 28-day fast start day by day. And the teacher in me realized, fast, feast, repeat is very comprehensive. That's actually the subtitle, The Comprehensive Guide to Delay, Don't Deny Intermittent Fasting. But it is so comprehensive that if you've got a friend who doesn't like to read a lot, they are not going to read it. You can be like, oh, go read Fast, Feast, Repeat. It's everything. They're not going to read it. And so then they won't know all the best practices. They won't know, the ins and outs of it. So the teacher in me knew that some people needed a little more of a handhold. So like every single day, it's like you set your goals for the day. You have a little inspirational message from me, but also a lesson, like what is the clean fast, or, the science of habit creation, just a little something. Or like, what is your body doing while it's adjusting while you're becoming metabolically flexible? What does that mean? Just something like that. And you also get a little inspirational story from a past intermittent fasting stories guest. And so it's just enough to keep you going, to know what you need to know when you need to know it without reading, an entire comprehensive book before you begin.
So great. That is awesome. Okay. So to any listener who, they are, or potentially they want to be trainers and coaches, those of you who are here knowing you want to pull that trigger and they aren't right now, what if they just feel pulled to become trainers or health coaches, but they have no formal training, just a strong interest? What would you say might tell them that this is a fleeting thing versus a real life-loving, game-changing pursuit to make?
Well, it just has to do with, does it light you up? Do you feel excited about the idea of doing it? Or does it feel like a drag and like a job and like you're doing it because you should be doing it? And that is really how I decide what I'm going to do. Like you and I are in a community together of other health and wellness professionals. And, you join this community. It's a fabulous community and I love everybody in it. It has been such a blessing to me. And that's how I met you. But they love to give you ideas of what you should be doing, like what a next step might be. And so people have had lots of ideas of what my next step should be. And I've like followed down the path. I'm like, well, logically, that sounds like a good next step. And I'm like making the calls and making the new websites and going down the path. And then I get to a certain point. I'm like, this is not for me. And I stop because it doesn't feel right. My intuition, my inner voice, when you start going down that path that feels wrong, your body tells you in so many ways. And then, but if you're doing something like when Sherry and I decided to pivot on our new podcast, it felt right. It felt like the right thing. It felt like the right decision. Nothing about it. My body didn't give me that feeling. My intuition telling me this is wrong. Instead, it just felt right. So if you tune in and really listen to what your body is telling you, if you feel lit up inside with the idea that you're going to become a health coach and help people, then you'll do it. And if it's a drag and you hate it, you're not going to do it and you're not going to want to do it and you're not going to be successful because you have to have the enthusiasm for it. If you don't have it, then nobody's going to want to work with you.
Beautifully said. I love that. Where can listeners, and by the way, listeners, we're going to send you over also in the show notes for today. We're going to send you to the main podcast. And as we do so very often, if there is a Flipping 50 podcast that is kind of the sister act to this and you're getting the behind the scenes here, it was yesterday released. And so this one is just for you, just about the building of the business and the thought that goes behind that. But where can listeners follow you and learn more and kind of watch over your shoulder and see how you're running your business?
Well, I would love that. Go to jenstevens.com. Jen is like gin and tonic. And then Stevens is Stevens with the PH. I've told that a million times. Because people always think it's like Jennifer, and it's not. My name is Virginia. So it's Virginia, jen.stevens. jenstevens.com, jenstevens.com. And you can find my books, my podcasts, everything there.
So beautiful. And thank you again for coming on over. Okay, health and fitness professionals or want to be's, you just heard it, and you will hear more if you go to Flipping 50 and listen to that one, that she pivoted midlife. So if you're all thinking, it's too late, or, that ship sailed. Yeah, no, we're not buying that stuff that you're selling. So,
and I even pivoted after I pivoted.
Yes. And there may be more, right?
Yeah.
So fitnessmarketingmastery.com/letting go of good. And what are you waiting for? The world needs us right now more than ever.